How are you doing?
I'm not on fire, and so that's good.
That's wonderful. So we're so excited to have you here. We know that you've ventured into Bitcoin fairly recently, and we want to ask you all about that. I'm really eager to do that. But I thought before we do that, I thought of asking you a few questions about some things that I think a lot of people here can relate to about your background. And the first thing I thought of was to ask you about entrepreneurship, because this place is brimming with it. 10 years ago, almost none of the companies that you can see here at the conference existed. And so entrepreneurship really runs deep in the Bitcoin space. And for a person who's generally introduced to audiences around the world as a clinical psychologist, as a best-selling author, as a professor emeritus, it seems to me that you have an unusual fondness for entrepreneurship and unusual appreciation for it. And so I was curious to ask if you have any thoughts about how that might have started for you. Like, I know you grew up in a small town in Alberta. I believe the town didn't even exist until the year 1928. So I was curious, maybe that has something to do with it, but just curious about your thoughts.
Well, I think I got interested in entrepreneurship fundamentally because I'm curious, and the most appropriate way to understand something is to try it. And so when I was a junior professor, I needed some money, so that was part of it, and I tried to figure out if there was anything I knew that might have any commercial value. So there was just a practical driver, but at the same time, there was a lot of noise in the academic community, a lot of it coming from business people, that the university should do more to transfer their knowledge into the domain of practical economic utility. And one of the things I learned is that most of the people who make those sorts of noises are people who never discovered anything scientifically and never started a business. And so because they know nothing about either, they think that doing both would be easy. And it's not. And so part of the reason that so little knowledge generated in the research community transforms itself into entrepreneurial activity is because it's actually really hard to start a business. And the idea, and this is one of the things I learned very painfully over a long period of time, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, is that, you hear this idea, cliche, because it's not an idea. If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door, which it won't, because first of all, we don't need a better mousetrap, really, so it's foolish just on the face of it. But more deeply, if you have a good idea, and even if it in principle is a saleable idea, and you produce a product that's in keeping with that idea, you've probably solved 5% of your problems. And my colleagues and I produced a series of tests that were aimed at helping business people hire better employees, and we had very good scientific data indicating that these tests produced a tremendously positive return on investment. So by investing a little bit of money in the screening process and thereby improving the quality of your employees, you would gain substantively on the economic front well, I think our calculated return on investment was something like 500 to 1, right? A no-brainer, you'd think. And so armed with that, I went out into the business world trying to sell these tests, and that's when I learned, at least in part, what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And the first thing I realized was, oh yeah, product, that's, 5 to 15% of the problem at best. A huge part of the problem is communication, and so that would be marketing, advertising, all of that's communication fundamentally. What good is a product if no one knows it exists? And then of course sales, that's unbelievably difficult problem. And business people and academics tend to be contemptuous of salespeople, which is a huge mistake because it's very difficult to be a good salesman. And if you're a really good salesman, you're very good at fostering long-term relationships, and that generally means that you're an ethical player. And so, in any case, I was driven by two factors, by two motivations. One was, could I take some of what I knew and make it into something that was profitable for practical reasons? And the second was, could I learn how to run a business? And I did. I've run the businesses I started. I have a lot of them now, but that business I started 20 years ago, and it's quite successful for a variety of reasons.